Have you come to the realization that family violence is a part of your reason for separation or divorce from your ex? And have you been told by someone that you need to write it out or explain what family violence existed in your relationship? Well, today's episode will be really helpful for you because today we're going to be walking through Section 4AB of the Family Law Act, which defines what family violence is considered under Australian family law. And we're going to talk about how you can present that to someone and how you can show that with evidence. Welcome, Mum.
Hello, Laura. Hello, everyone.
Now, before we get started, I just want everyone to be aware that this episode is obviously going to include discussions of family violence, domestic abuse, and other issues, including trauma. So if you are worried you're going to be triggered, please don't listen to this unless you've got support. Please call 13 11 14 Lifeline if you need support. And if you are experiencing this, you can also call 1-800-RESPECT in Australia and get connected to the services that may be important for you. And also, an additional disclaimer is this episode is just for education. Mum and I can't possibly give you all the information you need on how to present the evidence to show that family violence existed in your relationship. This is something that is seriously requiring a lawyer and all of the things that are involved in going through this court process. Today, we are just discussing it to help maybe open your eyes to things that you can collate and gather to help you on your journey. But Mum is not your lawyer. This is not what you should rely on if you are going to court, and you should always, always, always get legal advice.
Right.
But let's get to the jingle.
Hello, I'm Laura Furiosi, divorced mother of 3, and I'm here with my mother, Lynette Galvin, with 35 years' experience in family law. You're listening to the Divorce Course podcast. Through our candid discussions, we hope to help you through your divorce or de facto separation. We will be answering the most commonly asked questions and covering the stages and steps that you will face on your way to freedom.
So, Mum, one of the reasons we're doing this today is because the definition of family violence recently has been changed, and the family court has changed some other things, including property issues that can now be affected by family violence that has occurred. So can you just tell us a little bit about those changes and why it is important to be able to show to someone whether family violence has occurred?
Well, just as a broad brush, the Australian government has changed the law, including the definition of family violence and also how family violence is to be taken into account in property settlement and so forth. So it came in on the 10th of June this year. And as you've said, Laura, the definition has really been expanded by the court. And it's super helpful, I think, for people to recognise what they're going through. And it is what the court will apply going forward. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of case law about it yet and how the court's going to apply it to property. But we do have a reasonable amount of case law where the court has looked at family violence with children's matters. So anyone who's got this in their history, and sometimes I think, Laura, maybe it's the first time they've realised some of the behaviours are actually family violence. And I think that's why the government has put in so many examples of what it means. But yes, so it's very encouraging with family to have that taken into account for people. But as she said, it's going to be very stressful for someone to repeat their story over and over again.
As you've said, Mum, the Family Law Act has changed the definition of family violence, which we're about to discuss in a minute. They've also changed that property settlement can be affected if there has been family violence, and there can be an uptick if there has been family violence. And so people are going to need to have to show in documents to their lawyers, etc., yes, there's been family violence. Here are my examples. Here's my evidence. And so today's episode, even though I've made myself a hot chocolate, I'm wearing as much pink as I can, and I'm sick, but I'm nervous of tackling it because I know we're obviously not going to be able to get over the meat of it within 40 minutes of a podcast episode. But I know that if we can tackle it, at least it gets you guys started. And at least it gives you somewhere to hoist your pole and get cracking on it. But it is, like I've said, please, please, please make sure you see a lawyer and get some help. But this is going to help you get your head around it. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the definition, and then we're going to look at the key points that they're calling in there what is violence. And we are then going to talk about how you can present that, what evidence you can gather because that is one of the number one most questions we get asked now. Okay, so property settlements affected by family violence now. How do I prove it? How do I show it? What evidence do I need? So today we're going to try and tackle that topic to the best of our ability, remembering we're not your lawyers and you're going to have to figure this out with someone professional.
Yes, and family law or family violence is something that mostly occurs behind closed doors. So it does get into the realm of he said, she said a lot of the times. But I think nowadays, with the law changed as it is and with the court trained as it is to identify things like coercive control and other sorts of violence, I think it is easier to find the evidence. But don't be disheartened if you can not find any evidence. I don't want people to think that they shouldn't mention it if they haven't got any evidence.
That is a very good tip. Yeah. Okay, so let's look at the definition of family violence. So it is in the Family Law Act. I'll pop it in the show notes as well, but it's section 4AB. Yes. And it's lengthy-ish, but it's got a lot of examples, like you said, Mum. I'm just going to quickly run through it. For the definition of family violence, for the purposes of this act, family violence means violent, threatening, or other behaviour by a person that coerces or controls a member of the person's family, the family member, or causes the family member to be fearful. And then it goes into some examples of behaviour that may constitute family violence include, but are not limited to, in other words, there are more examples they're not mentioning, an assault, a sexual assault or sexual abusive behaviour, stalking, repeated derogatory taunts, intentional damaging or destroying property, or intentionally causing death or injury to an animal, economic or financial abuse, preventing a family member from making or keeping connections with his or her family or his or her liberty. And then for the purposes of paragraph 2, examples of behaviour that might constitute economic and financial abuse of a family member include, but are not limited to, unreasonably denying the family member the financial autonomy that the family member would otherwise have had, such as by forcibly controlling the family member's money or assets, including superannuation, or sabotaging the family member's employment or income or potential employment or income, or forcing the family member to take on financial or legal liability, or forcibly or without the family member's knowledge accumulating debt in the family member's name, unreasonably withholding financial support needed to meet the reasonable living expenses of the family member or the family member's child, including at the time when the family member is entirely or predominantly dependent on the person for financial support, coercing a family member, including by use of threats, physical abuse or emotional or psychological abuse, to give or seek money, assets or other items as a dowry, or to do or agree to the things in connection with practice of a dowry, hiding or falsifying, denying things done or agreed by a family member, including hiding or falsifying, denying receipt of money, assets or other items in connection with practice of a dowry. And then number 3, for the purposes of this act, a child is exposed to family violence if the child sees or hears family violence or otherwise experiences the effects of family violence. Examples of situations that may constitute a child being exposed to family violence include, but are not limited to, overhearing threats of death or personal injury by a member of the child's family towards another member of the child's family, seeing or hearing an assault of a member of the child's family, comforting or providing assistance to a member who has been assaulted, cleaning up a site after a member of the child's family has been intentionally damaged or by another member of the child's family, and being present when police or ambulance officers attend an incident involving an assault of a member of the child's family or another member of the child's family. So that's it. It was a bit of a mouthful, but I think it's important just to read it out. And of course, you can download and have a look at it. But really, they're breaking it down into examples, and they're really nutting into the financial side of things, and then really nutting into how children can be involved in family violence, even if they're not personally attacked or in any way assaulted. There are all these ways.
Yes.
So,
and Rosie and Laura, the bit about the financial abuse has been expanded the most recently. So that came in just recently. But gradually, I think the court is getting to grips with the many forms of family violence.
And I noticed in there, they put in that buzzword coerces or controls or causes fear. So they are trying to get on top of all of this behaviour that has always been hidden in the shadows, that is now people are shining a spotlight on.
Yes.
Some of the common behaviours that definition says can be family violence. It's not just assault.
No.
It's not just physical, is it,
No,
Mum?
physical's the easiest
yeah.
one. And we've come a long way from where the police used to go, show me the bruises. But yes, physical assault is easier to prove. You may have doctor's records or something like that. Or you may have your photos of your injuries. And there's your evidence for that. But the other stuff's harder.
All right. So number one, if you've got any actual physical or sexual assault issues, then of course, if you've got the photos to prove it, that's great. I heard a great friend had done it for somebody else, kept photos of the holes in the walls for them, kept notes of the dates they'd done it. And then when they finally decided to leave, they gave it to them and said, I've been documenting this for about a year. Here you go. So if you can't bring yourself to do it, get a friend to keep it collated. Get a friend to take the photos and keep the dates. But so yes, assaults, physical stuff is really bad, and it is definitely recognised a lot easier by all the enforcement and law out there. But you still need to have your documented evidence. But then we're going to get into this other stuff. So I'm just going to quickly run through the categories that I can see it breaks it down to. So it's assault, stalking or surveillance, repeated derogatory taunts or put downs, property damage, harming pets, financial control, isolation, and restricting freedom of movement. They're kind of the nutshell examples that I could tell out of the definition.
Yeah,
is that about right?
I think you're right, Laura. And a lot of people don't know that they're in this situation. When they're in it, it's only when they come out.
Yes. So then how, Mum, can someone prove emotional or psychological abuse so they can try and show that this person's been trying to isolate them from their family and friends and controlling them to do what they want? How do you show that in a document? How do you prove it?
Yes. So in some things it will be your word against theirs. In other things you'll have the evidence. It's important to remember that coercive control is a course of conduct. There are many, many little individual actions that of themselves don't look like they're actually coercive control, but when you add it all together, it is. And sometimes you may have evidence of one or two things. When I first take the story from them about the behaviours, I'd then be saying, do you have any of that by way of a text message? Have you told anyone by way of a text message? Is there Facebook stuff? How did you communicate this? And so often text messages are available, and on their own, they don't show much coercive control or psychological abuse. But if you can show a pattern, for instance, that when you go out, you get bombarded with text messages, things like that, and then you can produce those.
So people have heaps of text messages in their phones. No one really deletes them. So I guess you could download it. There are apps and things you can get to download your messages from your phone. I'm not saying ChatGPT is a good thing, and I don't know what the privacy is like, but you could upload the messages into ChatGPT and ask it to highlight all the examples of of emotional or psychological abuse, and then get them that way. I'm just spitballing here. I have heard of other people getting letters from psychologists. What about marriage counselling? If you've been in marriage counselling, can you get the marriage counsellor to
usually not, I would have thought, because they were for both of you, you know. Yeah. But you're right, Rose. And people, there's usually hundreds and hundreds of text messages, and you don't put evidence of hundreds and hundreds of text messages in your affidavit. What you do is, in your affidavit, you will put a heading, and it usually will fit in one of those definitions under 4A and 4AB. And then you put perhaps the broad thing on numerous occasions between 2022 and 2023 that the person did this. I have text messages to demonstrate that. And you might even say, I've got 1,208 text messages to demonstrate this, but I have attached just 3 of them and go into those. But you can say, if it is about perhaps haunting you when you're out or wanting you to come home, then there's a category you can do under coercive control or, sabotaging work.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just going back to the emotional and psychological abuse, we'll get to financial in a minute. What about keeping a journal yourself? Does that help?
Yeah. But a lot of people, if you recognise it, you can keep a journal, but not many people do. once people realise it, then they're able to break free. So I don't find many intentional records that were made at the time. But that friend sounds golden.
But I do hear people with post-separation abuse that then still have that psychological and emotional abuse. They could document that as well. And Mum, the other question we do get asked a lot about this is, can you record them abusing you?
Well, in some states, yes. As long as you know. In some states, yes. Some states, no. Okay. And I'm not getting into that because there's some states in Queensland, in Australia, where if you record a conversation that you're a part of with another person, that's quite okay to record. But in other states, it's not okay. So, yes, be very careful with that. I know that the court can inform itself of things almost any way it chooses, especially if it is to do with the welfare and safety of kids. They might admit that in evidence. Trouble with recording is that because you know it's being recorded, then even though you think you're acting absolutely normally, the court will think, well, of course they're not going to do anything wrong because they know they're being recorded. So it's a little bit of it's not as good perhaps as just being able to say, look, here's the text message that was chasing it up, or otherwise make the story live. Like you need to, if you're going to put down incidences of coercive control or keeping you away from your family, then you might say, for instance, at Christmas this year, we were supposed to go to my family, and then at the last minute we cancelled. And you may have evidence of that, an email or text or something, and you can then say it was because of his coercion.
At least people know that's the case and they can explore that. So I guess really when it comes to psychological or emotional, it's going to come down to journal writing, screenshots of your texts, recording if it's legal in your state, check with the lawyer, check your laws, and then can get counsellor, psychologist support letters, etc. like that. So they're things you can consider as well. Now, when it gets to the economic and financial abuse, which is relatively new, the court's only just started recognising this.
It's a very old thing.
Which is great.
It's very old.
I know, it's been around for a while. So what kind of proof would you recommend people start digging around for when it comes to showing that there's been financial or economic abuse?
I think that you have to be careful here, just a little caveat. Sometimes people are firm with each other because they're on a budget, and it's not going to be any of that kind of reality checking that a couple who are saving for a goal do. But there's usually bank statements and things for taking away the money, a budget that you've got, or you may have regular meetings about it, or there may have been notes written about it. You may not have control over where your cash goes. I've heard of cases where the little bit of money a person gets for maybe Centrelink or for work or whatever instantly leaves their account and goes into account of the other person's name. And that, it seems, was because the abuser was worried that if she got any money, she'd leave. And so that's really coercive control. You can also do it the flip side, right? You may have lived a fairly modest lifestyle and lived within your means, but there are lots of cases where the other person in the relationship has got planes, hot rods, motorbike, whatever they want, they've bought, while the person at home is on a strict budget and has to sort of ask for extra money for food or whatever. So, and generally, I just think those notes, those text messages that illustrate that kind of behaviour, or if in the case of fancy cars and stuff, take some photos and put it next to perhaps what you were doing at that time. At this time, we were limited to this much money for groceries. If the children wanted anything for school, I had to get them secondhand. Meanwhile, here he is with the boat, the plane, the fancy cars. So that can sometimes do it. Sometimes people run businesses without including the person who isn't in the business. Say someone's a stay-at-home person. And if that business is just going pear-shaped and draining the money from the family, then that is also a secret of abuse. It's also wastage, to be honest, because if you'd known that, then you too might have been involved in a decision about your joint welfare. So there's a lot of things like that.
So could you have proof by saying, here's a text message or an email where I asked them for information about what's happening in the business and they wouldn't respond, or here's on this day I found out from ASIC that we owed this much in tax debt, and when I asked, they wouldn't give me any information. So that kind of stuff.
Here's the day that I no longer was able to access our books. Often in businesses, one person does the bookings and perhaps bookkeeping of the business while the other person is the tradesperson. And then all of a sudden they're blocked out and they've got no say or no knowledge of what's going to happen, what has been happening. And then they get dragged down that route, particularly if you're a director of the business, of the company, and maybe a shareholder. You may be signing things that as a director you don't know what they are, but you trust your ex, and then you find out that they've been misusing it. So, those sort of things, they're new to being dealt with as abuse because it's a commercial thing and they expect if you're a director, you know what you're signing and you know what to do. But I'm really pleased that the court has been able to recognise that people don't have free will. You really don't have free will if you're being coerced and controlled.
So I guess unreasonably denying, this is 2AA, unreasonably denying the family member the financial autonomy that they otherwise would have had by controlling their money or assets. Like you said, Mum, you could show that their money goes in and then it disappears.
Yes. Or your wage goes into an account they're the only ones who've got access to.
Or they say, or you've got text messages say, hey, can I please have some money? I need this. And they say no. I guess you've got to think about that. Now, when it comes to sabotaging the family member's employment or income for potential employment, what kind of proof would you need for that?
I'm thrilled with this being in there. I really am. One of the examples is the obvious one that I see a lot, was they turn up at the workplace and cause havoc there. It is, if a person then fears for their job or maybe even threatened with dismissal as a result, that's sabotaging their work. If they want unrealistic time arrangements with the children, and the only reason is to stuff up your work week, that could be sabotage. Breaking or destroying the things that you use in your work. Perhaps if you've got your own business, you're an artist, breaking your brushes, all that sort of stuff. Sabotaging the internet so you can't function. Taking the keys of the car so you can't get to work on time. Many ways that can happen. And it is, if you've got a job, that's your toehold in independence and reality. And if it's starting to wobble, that's often the thing they want to attack. So you don't go there, so you can't talk to anyone else and get some clarity about what they're doing.
So evidence-wise, you've got to find proof of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I guess if they are showing up to your work, you could get video footage or CCTV.
And someone
or emails they might have written to your boss, those kind of things.
And you can get records of outages, or if the battery's flat or the car keys have been stolen. There might be something that you can remember about that date, so you get some particular dates. Sometimes if these events happen around, I guess, mediation dates or changeover dates, and it might look pretty suspicious that these things keep cropping up on those days. So it seems tenuous. It's not like, but we're not looking at criminal standard of proof here. We're not looking at beyond reasonable doubt. We're looking at whether on the balance of probabilities these actions occurred and did that. And then, of course, you need to show then the impact that it had on you physically or, I guess, emotionally, but what it did with your work, made you fear for your job, or if what they did to you made you feel down and you couldn't function. So you do need to connect it to how you felt. Although a fairly recent case, Dajani and Dajani, says that the court can take, I guess, judicial notice that some things will cause a person to be upset and feel assaulted and attacked. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, the other one that I find interesting and I want to ask, because we get this asked a lot, and this is B, unreasonably withholding financial support needed to meet the reasonable living expenses of the family member or the family member's child, and including at a time when the family member is entirely or predominantly dependent on that person for financial support. Does that include child support? messing with child
I
support.
reckon it could, but I haven't seen any cases on this yet. But it could.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting about this as well is that if you were, say, a stay-at-home parent, right, and the other person was the breadwinner, so to speak, and then they just cut the bread off, cut their job, cut their money, and they're no longer part of the scene, and you're separated, just doing that, even though you've separated, that also now comes under the definition of family violence and economic control. And I'm hoping that it will mean that fewer people have to go to court to get some money to live on, because if they have to go to court to get money to live on and the court orders there's money to live on, then it kind of proves that they were coercively controlling, financially controlling, and therefore committing family violence. And family violence is going to have an impact on the overall property split. So I'm hoping more people will be more reasonable about continuing the support after separation.
So if someone's listening to this today and their ex is just like, no, we're separating, if you're leaving me, you don't get any more money, I'm done, and they know that this person is completely reliant on the other person, that is evidence. That messages is evidence. And even if they don't say it in a way that you could prove it as a record, you could just show, look, here's my bank account. This is the day we separated and I'm completely
Blocked from it.
Floundering.
Yeah.
And if anyone is in that situation, we've got a great episode called Spousal Maintenance, Am I Eligible? And also Spousal Maintenance, How to Apply. And those episodes will take you through how to basically get the court to force them to pay. But I think child support should be included in that as well. If they're deliberately not paying child support when they should be, that sounds to me like unreasonably withholding financial support.
Yes.
And that's a new
Yes.
definition.
And
that's part of the new
That's
definition.
right. And if that's the case, you'll have something from child support. I also just thinking, when you were talking before, Laura, about the bank statements, another thing people do is they go in to the bank account and get the password changed, or suddenly you can't see your own bank statements again. And so that also has to be financial control. It has to be family violence.
So you can say on this date, the passwords were changed.
Here's a screenshot
XYZ.
of my thing and I was relying on that money. Or here's when I went to the dentist and I tried to use our card, our health insurance card, and it was, so you keep all those little things. You'll have bits and pieces, but if you haven't, the thing about financial control is that it sometimes continues past separation, as we've discussed, and includes the way they conduct themselves in court.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to another interesting definition, which was your ex isolating you from family and friends. How do we prove this? Can you get testimonies from people saying such and such wouldn't let me, we weren't allowed to go out, I wasn't allowed to go to my mum's house? Like,
No.
what kind of proof can you show for being isolated from your family?
Your family and friends, all they can say, I guess, is that, well, we had a good relationship and then suddenly we didn't, and we don't know why. You're the only one who can really say what happened and why you suddenly were gradually taken away from your family. A classic financial control or coercive control thing to do is to move to another city with you and the kids, away from your support group, and maybe sometimes against your wishes, but you've stayed with the family. So it often is just you. It might be that we went to Christmas every year. We haven't been to Christmas for the last 4 years because they didn't want us to go, or they booked holidays in those times. And I think it is just the before and after that you can say, and since separation, I've reunited with my family and I've got that toxic sort of thing out of my head.
I've heard of a person who got stopped from going to charity events, just like charity lunches or charity dinners. And the way, though, they didn't say you can't go. What they did was when they went to one particular one, they told me that their ex, who wasn't their ex yet, locked them out of the house, made sure they handed the keys over. And actually, I've heard this twice for 2 different people, where the ex said, give me your keys, I'll look after them, make sure you're home by this time, otherwise you won't be able to get in. That was one of them. And the other one just said, give me your keys, I'll be home to let you in, and then made them sit outside for hours. The other person had to go and sleep at somebody else's house. So That seems to be a thing. Like, that's a way to control someone to not do what they want. So try not isolate you. Try not for you to go socialize or do whatever through punishment, through access to the house. How would you put that in your evidence?
Exactly how you said it, Laura. That was terrible.
Okay.
Because in my mind, the back part of my mind is thinking, well, who died and made that person the boss of you? But the fact that you would hand your keys over means you're already in the thrall of that person. You know, I mean,
I can't believe two separate people have told me such a similar. So you just tell that,
and
so you would say you wouldn't put every example, but would you say whenever I wanted to go out, there was some unspoken rule that you must be back by this date or time because they've taken my keys?
Yes, and I think you could do it like that quite easily. Just do that unspoken rule. You might find also too with alienation from your family and friends, the first person I think who gets perhaps the red cross for going to the house is any outspoken girlfriends you've got who might call it like they see it. Suddenly you're not inviting them over because you pay the price later on. You're not sure what they're going to say while your friend is there, and just gradually your friends stop coming because they don't like the environment, and they just gradually do isolate you. And it's good. And you need your friends for your mental health, and you need your family for your mental health. So the more and more dependent you become on this person, the easier it is for them to say to you, you've got to be home on this time. And you say to yourself, I've got to be home by that time.
So I guess you could maybe, like if you've got a calendar schedule diary or something, you could say, here's all the social events I used to attend, and these how many times my friends used to come over. And in the last couple of years, this is how isolated I was.
Yep.
These people stopped going. I wasn't technically allowed to go to these things. So I guess you could do a comparison before your relationship and after, or just show the general drop over time of social.
Well, they can do an affidavit. Your friends can do an affidavit. Up until this time, we were great mates. I used to see her all the time. When I went over to the house, he was grumpy, that she was on edge, and gradually I stopped going, and she made excuses not to come to my place. That sort of thing. So those strong friends can start to help paint the picture of what it looked like from the outside. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's focus on evidence for the definition of family violence when it talks about exposing children to family violence. Now, we've already talked about physical stuff. So if there's any physical, of course, you'd be taking photos and documenting that as best you can and going to the police as soon as you can.
The doctor.
But I think it's important to note that kids don't have to be directly harmed to be included in the family violence. Like they can just be seeing it, hearing it, or as Mum, you've mentioned many times, and as the Family Law Act says, the definition says, cleaning up after it, or seeing the police come or the ambulance come. So it's the emotional harm.
That's right. And
that is a serious factor.
Yeah. And if you're the primary carer of the children and you're not functioning well, and I have heard some stories of people who have been dreadfully abused, but then are able to get up and perform the function of giving the kids their dinner, putting the kids to bed. But the kids know that you're not your best self. If they catch you crying, if they're just picking up on the atmosphere, that affects the kids. So I think they're affected by family violence too. Even if they don't clean up, even if they didn't see the police, even if they didn't witness it, if you're under the weather, if you're upset, I see your eyes are red, kids aren't silly.
I know, but we're talking about trying to prove it, Mum, in the court of law stuff. So the definition says they've seen, heard, or cleaning up after violence. I guess what you would just have examples, such and such threw his plate across the room because he was so mad at me at dinner and the children watched me clean it up.
That's right.
That's an example.
And it may only be once, all right? And that's what the court tells us in Dajani and Dajani. It may only be one tremendous episode that has that effect on you and on the children. I think sometimes everyone in the household can normalise abusive behaviour. But to anyone who's listening and this resonates with them, just remember the girls are learning how to be treated and the boys are learning how to treat women. When they see this even if you're staying together for the sake of the kids.
Yeah. Yeah. But let's focus on proving it, Mum.
Well, no, let me say this, darling. The court doesn't expect, they're not going to expect you to have documentary evidence of everything. But if you've got, say, the police have been there, you can just say, and when they came, the kids were there. And that might not be disputed by the other person. And so there the evidence is, it is, and unless they can say it is, the kids weren't there, then it was, they're there. So a lot of it's coming from you.
So you can just say it. You can say, such and such did X, Y, Z, and the kids were there, or the kids then came downstairs and saw me cleaning it up, or the kids then had to deal with the aftermath and had to go to Aunt Joey's because they knew how upset I was.
So, yes, but to make that story live, right, really live, if our listeners want to document it, say where you were. I was near the breakfast bar in the downstairs kitchen.
Who has a breakfast bar? What is this, like Days of Our Lives? I was near the breakfast bar having my champagne in the morning.
No,
okay. So let's do an Aussie version of that.
Okay, all right. In the kitchen island. In the kitchen island. Yeah. No, so I was down in the kitchen, standing near the island. My partner had thrown the plate. It had smashed on the floor. I heard the children coming down the stairs, and Olivia popped her head around the corner, and I said, "Don't come near kids, there's glass on the floor," right? That sort of thing. Right. And then it might be what your ex was doing at the time. That kind of, I think that the court can understand it better if they understand exactly where it happened, who said what, who was wearing, where did the person go after they dropped that, did they come and help with the kids after that? Did it make you late for school? Those sort of things. So, the story, like you tell your friends.
Okay. All right. So really, and we're about to get to this bit anyway, what's a good way to structure it and tell your story? What you're saying is all of these points, and everybody, if you have experienced family violence or apart from getting support and help that you need from 1-800-RESPECT, download this definition of the Family Law Act, of the definition of family violence from the Family Law Act, and go through each one and come up with your examples, and then write it in this way. As Mum said, tell it in a story, not vague. You've got to focus on what happened, when it happened, where it happened, and how it made you feel. And like you said, Mum, tell it like a story, because you've got it. You always say make it live.
I think you have to. So your judges are reading this sort of stuff all the time. And a lot of what they read are precedents, that someone's using the same phrases. But a good affidavit for evidence will say, even if you don't know the date, I remember it was just before the football final in 2023. Or I remember it was last winter about 8 o'clock in the morning when I was getting the kids ready for school. Just that kind of broad brush.
And describing what they looked like or how they were. So I knew that he was mad because he was bright red and his fists were so describing what they looked like, if there was anything that gave, because I guess sometimes the looking gets left out of stories because people are just doing the what, when, where, how. But what did they look like? What nonverbal cues were they giving you? Because that's usually where the coercive control is hiding most of the time.
Right.
And like you said, Mum, what happened in the aftermath is just as telling in the story. Did they immediately get down and apologize and say, I'll never do that again, I'm so sorry? Or did they slam the door and leave and drive off in a hurry? All that kind of stuff does add to the understanding of the dynamic, not just the actual, he threw a plate across the room. And it's all what happens before and what happened after.
And thereafter too, if you've learned to fear that look, then that look is something they can do anywhere to you, in the court, in mediation. That's the power. And it can sound silly to someone who doesn't know your history or who's never been in that situation. And I dare say almost every judge in the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia has never been in a situation where someone staring at them has made them scared to their stomach. And so to say, it's when they look at me like that, sounds really unbelievable, and you'll probably get lawyers going, oh, really? Whereas they don't remember where you come from. So if you tell your whole story, then you can say that after that, just a look. And I would regulate my behaviour to their requirements. And that's where people don't realise you're taking on their rules. In fact,
they're training you.
And then after that, you don't go there because you don't want the argument. You keep yourself in that cage for fear of repercussions. And you shouldn't feel bad about that. It's happened to so many people, and it happens to good people, because if you weren't a good person, the person that wants to control you wouldn't bother with you. They want to get someone who's lovely and then break them down so they feel better.
How many examples should they give? If they've got heaps, do they just give one really good example and say, I've got more, but if you want them? Or like, how do you go? Because most people only get 10 pages in an affidavit.
Because that's in the interim one. Interim hearing, you've only got those 10 pages. So you don't list every event. What I would suggest you do is go through the section of the Act that applies to you. So you might say, for instance, forcibly controlling my money, including my superannuation, put that as a little heading, and then underneath it, I never got to put money in superannuation because my ex always put it into his superannuation. I don't know what I have. They wouldn't let me set. And I've had numerous examples of me asking, but you don't need to apply them all. You just put one attached, and it's an example of it attached. Or I rarely had access to money. I was always asking for money. And here's 2 examples from recently, or one recent and one maybe a bit earlier, where I was trying to get the money. And so the court needs to know, you say what happened, make sure it fits in something the judge can hang their hat on, like in the Act, and then summarise it, and then add one little example or maybe 2, and then say, I've got the rest. And then your final affidavit, you probably will.
Yeah, in a final trial, you can put it all. And if you're going through DB court, not family court, you can probably put it all as well.
Yes, but it doesn't help the judge. I remember one that I went to, and it was a man who was allowed to send texts to his ex-wife as long as it talked about the children. And I think I've told the story. Every one of the texts mentioned the kids, but when I printed them out, there was a pile of about 2.5 centimetres high of text messages, and it turned out to be 1,500 text messages in only a matter of a couple of months. And so the court was able to, I summarised. I said, there's 8 to a page, there's this many pages, therefore it's 1,500 text messages. Every one of them mentions the children, but they were a bombardment on her. And that helped the court see, text messages about the children, what are you talking about? Oh, that many text messages? That changes things.
And can I just say to anyone who's not needing to write an affidavit right now, but has experienced family violence, it is such a good exercise for you to sit down and go through the definition of family violence in the Family Law Act and write your examples now before you forget. Because one of the things that happens, as Krasi has told us in our Is It Emotional Abuse episode, where she basically says your brain will file it away in a place you can't remember it because your brain doesn't want to deal with it or can't deal with it because you're still trying to survive. So there's a lot of incidences that may occur or that have occurred that you may forget about, especially when you're still packing a house, trying to figure out who's going to go where and all the other things that come along with divorce. On top of that, you are dealing with this. So it's a great idea to just get it all down, get it out of your head somewhere safe so that you know that when anybody does ask, you can go, here's some examples.
Isn't that good? Because you will be asked about things over and over and over again. And it's distressing to repeat your story over and over and over again. And so it's quite handy, isn't it, to have a document, even if you're still adding to it, even if it's just a notes app on your phone. It doesn't have to be spelt properly. It just needs to get it down. And the other thing, Laura, too, is sometimes when you start to doubt yourself, it wasn't that bad, surely it wasn't that bad, then read it and remind yourself what it is that was going on, because you will block it out.
Now, you may start doubting yourself and self-gaslighting, as Krasi called it, the psychologist in that episode. But lawyers sometimes do as well.
Yes.
And I'm putting this here. We've done an episode called Is Your Lawyer Gatekeeping Your Story? And we are hearing still lawyers saying Don't talk about it. Don't mention it. Mum, what do you say to anyone who's got a lawyer who's telling you, who's listening today saying, hey, don't mention the family violence. You don't need to mention that. What do you say to those who have a lawyer like that?
I think your lawyer needs to be aware of the changes to the Family Law Act, and they need to be aware of the impact of what happened to you in the relationship. And especially if you don't raise it early, if you don't mention it early in your case, and then you put it in an affidavit 6 months down the track, it looks like you've made it up. So you need to speak your truth. My personal favourite that really made my blood boil was a lawyer who told a person that in our groups that unless there was a criminal assault, family violence didn't count towards property settlement. So wrong. So for everyone who's listening, you arm yourself with the actual facts. And if a lawyer doesn't seem to get it, you might need to go and find someone who does. Because we've all been trained. We've had 6 months education intensively on what constitutes family violence and particularly on coercive control. But no one forced us into school to learn it. So some people, some lawyers I'm hearing, must have not listened or mustn't have done their own self-training. But I can assure you the court's aware, the judges are aware, the specialist lawyers are generally aware. So if your lawyer isn't aware, then they're the odd one out and you might need to go and find someone else.
Another group of people that may be listening today are the ones who are afraid to rock the boat.
Yeah.
And I have heard many reasons. Some people are like, well, if I bring up family violence, I'm worried that they won't settle. I just want to get property sorted. I just want the kids' stuff sorted. If I bring up the family violence, that's going to cause World War III. And what do you say to those people who don't want to, inverted commas, rock the boat?
I can understand that. If you're trying to negotiate with someone and there is likely to be an outcome that's suitable to you, if you can just keep negotiating, then why would you raise it? You're not in a court, right? If you're just doing it in mediation. There's two people who know what happened. You're one of them. They are the other one. So they know very well what happened. What they don't want you to do is to share that information with third parties, right? And if you are able to mediate without having to go to the court, that's fine. That's good. You may say to your mediator, I don't want to be in the same room and I don't want to see that person on the screen because there has been family violence. That's confidential between you and the mediator. But if you're starting court proceedings, then you're going to have to nail your colours to the mast. It might be that the fact that there's family violence and you've been able to prove it gives you an extra 15% in the property pool, or it may, when you go to trial at the end of the trial, or it may be that just putting that in your application will make them keen to settle on it, even if it's not the whole 15%. At least it might make them settle quicker to avoid further airing of their dirty laundry. I used to think that a perpetrator of coercive control didn't know what they were doing. I am wrong. So wrong.
They know.
Because they know. Of course they know, because they don't do it to other people. If they can turn it off for other people and turn it on for you, they do know. And I no longer have any sympathy for someone who's just dumb.
And I think this worrying about rocking the boat and you just want to get your property settlement sorted, I get that. But you need to be aware that you may not come to an agreement because you may also not be wanting to rock the boat and you may be scared to say no to them for anything. They may say, I'm going to do this for property settlement and you're going to take it or leave it. So it puts you in a position on the back foot where how much non-rocking the boat are you going to do? How much are you going to sacrifice? How much of your future security and your kids' security are you giving up by being afraid to rock the boat? Because there have been a lot of people who've emailed me and said, I was afraid to rock the boat in the start, so I didn't. And now we're in this huge battle and I wish I had from the start because it's happened anyway. The fear of them whatevering has occurred. So make sure you've really thought about the outcomes and the possibilities and how to have a talk to your psychologist, have a talk to your lawyer. Are you not doing things because they're still controlling you? Are they still controlling you through their words and through their looks?
And you think you're putting the brakes on it. You think you're not rocking the boat for your reasons, but probably you've internalized their threats because they must have an or else we won't get a property settlement. Well, they're just dangling that carrot and you probably won't anyway. But you've got to be safe, guys. Sometimes calling it out makes it unsafe.
And court orders, in the end, getting a court order, if that's what you have to do, it's going to put a stop to it. You know what I mean? Like, it is going to stop eventually. It's not like it's going to be forever. Yes, there's post-separation abuse, but you're probably experiencing that now. Once you've got court orders that can't be argued with, it is going to make your life better. Now, Mum, I know we've completely gone over time, but how important is it to seek legal advice before you submit any document?
Yeah, pretty important, but good legal advice. Are you meaning like in terms of setting out the family violence and the impacts on you?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. You've got to see a lawyer before you file stuff, right?
And I think put everything in your story and then the lawyers can filter out or summarise it, It just will help you. But yes, I think people are wanting to represent themselves in court and they can do a fair bit leading up to court, but you've got to have some legal advice, get some strategy, someone to check your work. Yeah.
They're kind of like a filter. So they look at your stuff and they go, that's not relevant. Like, if you're listening to this episode and you've gone through that definition of family violence, you know what's relevant to a family court. Some family violence that you may see as family violence isn't mentioned there. Maybe it's relevant, maybe it's not, but you'll know from that. But a lawyer's really going to know, and they're going to filter that stuff out. So, Mum, I'm sure you've seen some affidavits in the past that have been written by self-reps that are just completely unhinged. And we have done an episode on how to keep out the emotion and all of that sort of stuff. But sometimes you just need somebody else.
I never think of them as unhinged. I think that it's a good thing that they've written it down. I think people feel better when they've written stuff down. But then it is up to the lawyer to make sure that it's relevant and admissible in relation to the things that, they're talking about. But just check if your lawyer doesn't seem to get it, maybe go and get your work checked at a different lawyer's place. But it needs to be trauma-informed.
Coming from a business person, from my past and teaching point of view, you are writing this for a particular audience. And if it's an affidavit, you are writing this for a judge, some person sitting in a room somewhere who hopefully will read your affidavit from start to finish. And you're trying to tell that story to them. It's probably the biggest assignment of your life, but you need to get that story across to that person, someone who does not know you. And you need to get that feeling and whatever hell you've suffered, you need to get them to get it, to understand, oh, that's what this person has been through. I can see how it links to the Family Law Act and the definition of family violence.
And it's family violence in property settlement. It relates to how much harder your contribution to the family was because you were married to someone or was living with someone who coercively controlled you compared to if you lived with a normal human being. And I think in Dajani, they talked about alcoholism, someone being drunk, coming home from work drunk. You don't need to prove that therefore they couldn't bath the kids. It just was that much harder for you because you were the adult and the sober person. Yeah, it is hard, but you do need to have a look. I think to judges the night before a hearing or maybe a couple of days before, they sit down and all they've got is your application, your various notices, your affidavit. So they don't know you. You start off with a clean slate with them. Then they start reading. And that story that you tell is the first information they've got about you. And so if you've ever had a court case, you walk in and the judge, she'll look at you and look at the other person. She's not coming in blind. They've read all of your material. So, yeah, it's very important to have it checked by a lawyer. If you start putting too much irrelevant stuff in, then the relevant stuff might get missed. And I think relevance is something that a lawyer can tell you.
Right. And I think if we can embroider anything on a cushion, you need to match your story to what the law recognises.
Yes.
Make sure you're, so relevance, basically.
That's right.
Yeah?
Yep. And don't worry.
Okay.
If it is just your word against theirs, tell your story anyway, because if they make a bad impression in the witness box, you will be believed and not them. If they lie about something and you actually do have evidence for it, then the court will make a finding probably that they're not a reliable witness. And whenever your word against theirs, they'll choose you because you haven't told a lie.
Okay. And we have that great episode on Is Your Ex Telling Lies in Court, the He Said, She Said saga, where we go through some more help there as well. Look, guys, anyone trying to put all of this into words, it's going to be a horrific experience. It's like a school assignment. No one wants to do it. I get it. I understand. Writing an affidavit is just hellish unless you're a lawyer. And I think some lawyers don't even like doing it. And putting it into words is going to be so hard for you. And if you're listening to this, probably really painful as well. So be mindful of when you're going to do it and where you're going to do it. Who can you brainstorm some ideas with about what are some examples of the times that this has happened? Can you sit down and just think about it before you start to write it, and make sure that you plan. What are you going to do after you've sat down and written some of it? You don't have to write it all in one go, do you, Mum?
Don't.
You can just
and have your chocolate, have your tea or coffee. Give yourself a treat. Go to the op shops afterwards for something just to cheer you up. Yeah. But set aside a time. It is crappy, but you probably only have to do it once. So do all of your things once. And some things you don't want to tell people about. I get that. As you write your history, there might be stuff that you don't want to tell people about, but it is part of your history of violence. Put that on a separate sheet that you can remove when you're giving this document to random people as you go through your thing, but make sure you include it maybe for your counsellor or for your lawyer.
Yeah. Okay.
For things. Yeah.
All right. If you have felt triggered by this, please call 13 11 14 Lifeline. And if you haven't yet got any support and you're in Australia, please call 1-800-RESPECT and they can help you link to some good services. And of course, we've got lots of great episodes that will help you with writing an affidavit. Mum and I have done an episode on that. And we've also got some great episodes on post-separation abuse and is it emotional abuse? Is it financial abuse? Go and listen to those ones as well. And we've done it. It's taken us an hour.
It took us to episode 201.
201. If you've listened this long,
well done.
Biggest hugs to you. And imagine us sitting behind you in your office chair, cheering you on, not in a creepy way, as you write all of this out. So thank you, Mum, for your time today.
No worries, darling.
And big, 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 big hugs to everybody.
And if you think that there's someone who would benefit from hearing this, just pay it forward, perhaps like or subscribe to our channel. The more we can get it out there. Just think about how you found us. It's going to usually be by word of mouth.
Yeah.
So share it around.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see you guys next episode for 202.
Okay. Bye, Laura.
Thanks,
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
If you found this podcast helpful, we'd love it if you could rate, review, and subscribe. By doing so, you are spreading the word to help someone else just like you. Lynn would like to remind you that this podcast is general advice only, and you should always get legal advice in relation to your particular situation. And remember that the Australian laws may have changed since recording